fishing boats or climate refugees, which the convention doesn't really go into depth on explaining how it covers them. And lastly, they mentioned that it will be a shared responsibility. Through research, I've seen that the convention is not really enforced. No burden sharing of any sort is enforced in the convention. So really, we would be left to deal with it on our own. This side said that we might get help, but realistically, that's not possible because, like I mentioned, the lack of enforcement really limits what we can do and how these other countries might help us. Judges, that'll be all.
Thank you, opponents' rebuttal. We will now move on to the proponent's response to the rebuttal, and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, worthy opponents, for your rebuttal. I would like first to reiterate our 3 points on why the FSM should ratify this convention. First, the UN Convention as a treaty is right, while the mechanisms of some countries who are signed on are wrong. Second, it can serve as an economic booster. And third, with this convention will come a sense of shared responsibility. Now, my worthy opponents mentioned that we argued that we should sign on to the convention to this right. I want to make it clear that by signing on to the convention, we sign on because it is right. Because the countries who are signed on are what make bad mechanisms. We are there, the article of the conventions are there to help implement the required procedures. I would like to stand on our worthy opponent's point of how the UN Convention is too vague. I'd stick to my outline by again reiterating that the UN has the 46 articles that can help implement what to do when refugees arrive on our shores. Regarding their second point about how it is hard for refugees to come to our oceans because of the geography. I said it on my outline by saying that when they come, we will have other countries and agencies that help us when they come and to implement the articles rightly, and we will have shared responsibility when they arrive.
To add on to what my partner has said, I'd like to address the fact that my opponents mentioned climate change refugees. The climate change refugees, according to this UN convention, doesn't exist. A climate change, a person running away from fleeing their own country because of climate change is a climate change victim, not a refugee. A refugee, according to the convention, is fleeing his or her own country due to the well-founded fear of being persecuted as to race, nationality, religion, or political opinion. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now move on to the main arguments by the opponents. So you have 15 minutes.
Lemuel and goals. Thank you, judges, fellow debaters, and audience members. As the negative side, we will now establish why this resolution shall not be passed. To review our main points, as we said in the introduction, we will first show that the resolution is not in the best interest for the refugees and it's not in the best interest for the FSM. Since this resolution harms both the refugees and the FSM, it should not be passed. Judges, the resolution is against the best interest of refugees because the UN Convention is vague and unenforceable. It does not contain provisions for the sorts of refugees we are most likely to experience, and because refugee rights will be more firmly guaranteed by FSM national law. Before we explain these main points in detail, we first want to state that we have great sympathy for the hardships that refugees are facing all around the world. We firmly believe that refugees should be treated with respect and that their rights should be guaranteed. However, this UN Convention is not the best way to accomplish that goal. First, the Convention is against the best interests of refugees because it is vague, unenforceable, and easy to back out of. In Article 9 of the Convention, Provisional Measures, it states that countries can make exceptions to this convention for reasons of national security or maintenance of public order, which means it gives states an easy excuse to treat refugees however badly they want, regardless of the convention. For example, as in the case of the refugees that were detained on a boat in Bolivia for 10 months, we could just say that it was for public order. Article 9 gives nations an easy way to ignore the rights of refugees. Also, it is very unenforceable. Also in Article 38, it specifies that disputes over the convention can be settled in the International Court of Justice. For example, but an article by an Australian journalist, Rose Maloney, she points out that this is for complaining states against other complaining states. It has never actually been utilized. There are no provisions for the individual refugees to seek dispute resolution. Australia received widespread international criticism for its unfavorable treatment towards refugees, in particular in the case of shipping refugees to detention camps in Nauru. Australia has signed on to the convention, yet there are no consequences for their behavior. This is because, according to Australian National University professor Penelope Matthew, there is no monitoring body, no enforcement of the convention, no penalty for non-compliant states, and no recourse for the individual refugees. Would a refugee feel comforted by a convention that is vague, unenforceable, and can be left at any time? Of course not. The protections of the convention sound nice, but in reality, they do very little to really protect the rights of the refugees. In Article 44, Denunciation, the convention specifies that signing countries can leave the convention at any time without a single penalty. In addition to the fact that the convention does not firmly protect refugees, it is meant to, the definition used for refugees does not protect the rights of the refugees that we are most likely to receive in the FSM, namely climate refugees. This convention was created after the displacement of people in Europe in the aftermath of World War II. At the time, nobody was thinking about climate change. Therefore, the convention defines the term refugee as, quote, a person who is migrating owing to a well-funded fear of being persecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a social group, or political opinion. At the time, this seemed like a good definition, and it is true that many of the world's refugees today still fall into this definition. However, these are not the most likely sort of refugees for us to experience in the FSM. The FSM is unlikely to experience these sorts of refugees in large numbers because most of these refugees migrate to countries that are relatively close to their own homeland. The FSM is a small developing nation that is geographically isolated. This is why we do not receive many political refugees. In several interviews with current and former FSM state and national level elected and appointed officials, every single one of them noted that the FSM has relatively little experience with these sorts of refugees. So, what type of refugees are we most likely to experience? Climate refugees. The National Geographic Society defined a climate refugee as, quote, a person who must leave their home and communities because of the effects of climate change and global warming, end quote. In some parts of the world, this could be due to the effects of drought. In the appeal and peril of a new refugee convention, Princeton scholar El Parashioli, she gave an example of a Somali woman who had to migrate on foot away from Somalia because climate change left her unable to grow food. But she was denied access. She was denied access because she was not a refugee in the term of the convention. By far, the biggest potential source of climate refugees is rising sea levels, making coastal communities unlivable, and small Pacific islands are among the most likely places in the world to be affected. A report from Cornell University estimated that in this century alone, we could see up to 2 billion people who are forced to migrate due to rising sea levels. Another report from the University of Melbourne in Australia, it specifically cites that Pacific Islands are extremely vulnerable. They give examples in Fiji, Kiribati, and Tuvalu. Not only atolls are vulnerable, but also places like Kushan. Kushan has mountains and elevation, but majority of the population live next to the ocean, so they live next to the coast area, which will be affected by the sea level. Former FSM ambassador Asteria Takasi said that islands do not have to be literally underwater to become unlivable, because at some point, the sea level will rise high enough to contaminate crops and water sources, which will make islands unlivable without actually being underwater. Clearly, this should be a major concern for the FSM. In our interviews with the FSM Vice President, Yosiwa George, former FSM Ambassador to the U.S., Asteria Takasi, Special Advisor to the President, Gerson Jetson, Kushai Governor Linton Jetson, Kushai IOM official Rickson Jonathan, and Kushai State Attorney General Jeffrey Davis, every single one of them noted that climate-related refugee migration is an issue of extreme importance to the FSM. Other Pacific islands are already taking steps to deal with this issue. A Bloomberg News article cited that the Fiji Attorney General said that Fiji is creating a legal framework to help its climate refugee relocate. An article by the Straits Times discussed New Zealand's plans to create a special climate refugee visa after an incident in 2015 where a Kiribati man was denied refugee status because he was a climate refugee and thus not covered by the UN Convention and Protocol. It does not make any sense to base our refugee policy on this convention because it does nothing to cover climate refugees. And these are the types of refugees that we are most likely to experience in large numbers. For the FSM, utilizing a refugee convention that ignores climate refugees would be like designing a car with no brakes. It should not use a refugee policy that ignores the most likely sort of refugee we could experience. The shortcomings of vagueness, unenforceability, and its inapplicability to climate refugees brings us to our final reason why the convention is bad for refugees. Refugees would be more firmly guaranteed by the FSM national law than by this. Judges, imagine if you were a refugee. Ask yourself, what sort of protection would make me most confident that my rights will be respected? As a refugee, you would want protection that covers your basic rights, covers all types of refugees, and that has rights that clearly apply and cannot be dodged. You would also want to have an easy way for legal recourse if your rights were not being met. The UN Convention covers basic rights, but only for some refugees, and subject to exceptions due to maintenance of public order. Plus, countries can just ignore the convention entirely with no consequences, and refugees have no easy way to take the government to court if their rights under the convention are being violated. Contrast this with FSM national law. Under the FSM national law, we can guarantee basic rights for all refugees, including climate refugees. We can enact specific methods for refugees to easily sue for their rights if they feel that they're being taken advantage of. We could require the approval of the judge before stripping refugees of their rights. This would all be far more helpful to the refugees in this UN convention. Judges, we have shown that the resolution should not be passed because the convention is harmful to refugees by being vague and unenforceable, inapplicable to climate refugees, and inferior to FSM national law. The affirmative side may rebut and say, why not just use both the FSM national law and the UN convention? Well, if the convention is not actually beneficial to refugees, then passing it will be a waste of time. Which brings us to our second main point. The convention is against the best interests of the FSM because its ratification and ongoing reporting would waste time and resources for no benefit. Also, because its vagueness could lead us to embarrassing errors in implementation. And because ratifying this convention could lead us to the false conclusion that no further action is needed on refugees. Ratifying the convention is not free, and it would be a waste of time and resources. It takes time to debate the issue, draft the documents, direct the UN ambassador, and so on. Articles 35 and 36 under the convention requires governments to make ongoing reports to the UNHCR on the status of refugees in our country. What's the point of these ratification and ongoing reporting costs? Who benefits? Does anyone actually benefit? The Kasalelia Press published an article about the Nepalese boatmen who were detained in Colombo for months without basic rights. According to the article, the national police kept them on the boat due to the concerns of national security and public order. This made international news outlets such as The Guardian, Radio New Zealand, ABC, and among international relief organizations. All of the articles put a negative effect for the FSM. It made the FSM look like an unfriendly place to refugees because of the fact that we kept refugees in a boat with inhuman conditions for no good reason. Under the convention, the FSM could still use national security and public order as excuses, but that would lead to more negative coverage and embarrassment for our country. It's too vague and leaves too much room for our government to make embarrassment in errors and implementation. Lastly, ratifying the convention may lead us to the false conclusions that no further action is needed on the issue of refugees. We have already shown that the climate refugees are an enormous potential issue to the FSM, and yet the convention mentions nothing about them. If we ratify this convention, our lawmakers may not see the need to take further action to address the additional refugees issue, such as climate refugees, if we don't address the climate refugees, we'll find ourselves in a situation with a large number of refugees that we are unprepared to deal with. Judges, we care deeply about the hardships of refugees and the importance of the FSM addressing the issue of refugee migration. But we have shown that this convention is not the best way to do that. It would harm both refugees and the FSM. Therefore, it should not be passed. Thank you.
Thank you, Team Koshai, for your main argument. We will now proceed on with the proponent's rebuttal, and you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, fellow opponents, for your presentation of your arguments. Before I begin my rebuttal, I would like again to stand in my outline and reiterate my main points. The FSM shall ratify the UN Convention because the Convention as a treaty is right. It can serve as an economic booster, and with this convention, there will be a sense of shared responsibility. Now, to address my fellow opponents' arguments, there are 2 main points, which is the resolution is not in the best interest of refugees. It doesn't have its refugees because the UN Convention is vague and unenforceable, and it will be more guaranteed if the FSM shall provide when these refugees come. Now, Standing with my outline, I go back to repeat how the UN Convention has articles that are filled with regulations, duties, and rights for the refugees and the country of residence. 2 years, and they were and their needs, the necessities that FSM was not able to provide because the FSM
in your own country. You have to flee your country to be a refugee, according to the. Thank you.
Their time is up. Thank you. We will now move on to response to the rebuttal, and you have 3 minutes.
First off, I would like to say thank you for the rebuttal to our main arguments. But first of all, they did not respond to our first main point, which was this resolution is against the best interests of refugees because the UN Convention it's unenforceable. It does not contain the provisions for the sorts of refugees that we are most likely to experience in the FSM, and because refugee rights would be more firmly guaranteed by the FSM national law. What they did say was that we have articles. We have 46 articles to help lead us to make the laws. And they also said that we have no laws to address the refugees, which helps us with our main argument because we don't have the laws, we should not ratify this. We are not experienced it. And our second main point, which was the convention is against the best interests of the FSM because its ratification and ongoing reporting would waste time and resources for no benefit. Because its vagueness could lead to embarrassing errors in implementation, and because ratifying this convention could lead us to the false conclusion that no further convention is needed on the refugees. Our second main point, they also did not attack, so I will not respond to that. Thank you.
Thank you, both teams. We will now hear the summation or the closing arguments, starting with the proponent's conclusion, and you have 4 minutes.
In conclusion, I would like to give a summary again of our main arguments. The convention is right as a treaty and by its nature. Although some countries who are signed on may have been doing the wrong mechanisms, by the nature of this convention itself is right. Secondly, the convention can help us. The convention grants, signing this convention, it will grant refugees the right to seek a wage-earning occupation. And in the long run, this will help the Federated States economy. Lastly, the convention brings with it a sense of shared responsibility internationally. We'll work with contracting states when we need them, when they can and when we need them. With these 3 arguments, it is clear that the FSM, the Federated States of Micronesia, should ratify the 1951 UN Convention and its 1967 Protocol relating to the status of refugees. To conclude, I would like to take this time to thank the organizers, judges, opponents. We would like to express our appreciation for this opportunity to participate in this debate. We hope you fellow guests continue to enjoy your stay and continue to enjoy your stay here on our beautiful island. Thank you and kamgaray.
Thank you. Moving on now to the summation by the opponents, 4 minutes.
Judges, we have given our arguments as to why this resolution should not be passed. The UN Convention and its protocol may have seemed to be a good idea when it was first implemented, but it is not appropriate for the FSM in 2018 and on. We have shown that it is not in the best interest for refugees. The convention is vague, unenforceable, and easy to back out of. What refugee would feel protected by a convention that doesn't really enforce its protections? The convention leaves out refugees due to climate change. Why should we ratify a convention that offers no protection to the sort of refugees that we are most likely to have in the FSM? The convention is inferior to FSM national law. Wouldn't refugees want a strong, clear FSM national law as opposed to a convention that is vague and has numerous flaws in it? We have shown that it is also against the best interests of the FSM. Why? Because the convention requires time and resources to ratify and to comply with ongoing reporting requirements. Why waste the time and resources when the convention doesn't really ensure refugee rights? The convention is open to embarrassment and error implementations. Why expose ourselves to the international embarrassment that could come from the results of our efforts to implement this vague and poorly designed convention? The convention could lead us to ignore the important refugee issues. Why should our government address a refugee issue through this convention? Doing so, would leave us silent on the climate refugee issue that could have a huge impact on our country. Judges, refugees face enormous difficulty they are very vulnerable people. Thus, they deserve better protection than this convention. The FSM is facing the challenge of developing its economy while facing the looming threat of climate change. The FSM requires better refugee policy than this convention offers. This convention is bad for refugees and bad for the FSM, and that is why we, the FSM, should not pass the resolution. Thank you.
Permitted names. We will now open the floor to the judges to see whether they have any questions, any comments for the debaters. General Counsel Rescue.
Thank you. On behalf of my colleagues, the judges, let me first congratulate both teams on a job well done. I felt that are strong and really enjoyed listening to those arguments. I don't have a question, but I would like each of the teams to reiterate certain important aspects of their arguments. For Team Kosrai, YAP argued the economic booster, which I think that's a very important argument to make. Can you please address that issue by reiterating your arguments against the economic booster?
may take the stand to reply.
What I was trying to say was that regardless if we do ratify or if we do not ratify, the number and type of refugees that come to our islands or to our nation wouldn't be affected. And if we really look at it, the most common types of refugees that might come to our shores are boatmen and climate refugees in the Pacific area. And as we know that most of these boatmen are really poorly educated, and thus the chances of them coming here and becoming the Einsteins of FSM are very slim. So that is what I was trying to say.
Thank you. Okay, for Team YAP, Team Koshrai argued that the convention leaves out climate refugees. Can you please address this issue and reiterate your argument on this issue?
According to the UN Convention 1951 and its 1967 protocol, climate change refugees don't exist. And they are considered climate change victims when they are running away or fleeing because of climate change. According to the convention, a refugee is fleeing their country due to a well-founded fear of being persecuted as to race, nationality, religion, or political opinion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions from any of the other judges? No? Tom?
Yes, Team YAP, I was wondering what the source is of your statement that refugees must flee their country illegally to be a refugee.
Our source for that fact is stated in the UN Convention.
Team YAP, you mentioned in your presentation a number of times that it would be right to ratify the convention. What do you mean by that?
To answer your question, I guess what I'm trying to say is, well, yes, it is right for the FSM it would be right for the FSM to ratify this convention. We are a global partner in the UN, and we feel that it's right to open our doors to refugees, and by this convention, the convention can help us know what to do when the refugees come, and it helps them and it can help us.
Further questions?
No, that's nothing further.
Thank you. Having no further questions from the judges, I would like to ask that we give both teams a big round of applause. Now the difficult part is for the judges to tally up their scores. So debaters, you're free to take a break until your next debate. And we'll take a short recess, giving the judges ample time to tally up their scores and get ready for debate 2, which will be Bodbay versus Chuk. Bodbay arguing for the proposition, Chuk arguing against. So again, thank you very much, Team Koshai and Team YAP.